As we take a look at deviance, we need to keep in mind that it is a vast spectrum of behaviors. And so the definition for deviance is any violation of norms. So let's go back to what norms are, the usual typical unwritten rules that we have in society. And when you break them, you create strange, awkward situations. But increasingly, as you break more and more things, norms, they actually might be more than norms, they might be rules, they might be laws, right? And so deviance can go from, um, gosh, saying like a sarcastic joke or telling a little white lie like, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good today. You're not technically being honest, which I suppose is deviant, to lying about terrible things or injuring or hurting someone. And so, oftentimes in-person classes, I have groups sit down and what I call a deviant scale. They go through and they have to kind of start to rank what are the most increasingly deviant things that people do. And so it turns at some point to things that are relatively harmless but still wrong to do, to things that are increasingly harmful, to things that are horrifically harmful. But by defining these things as not okay, to say it is not okay to hit someone, to say it is not okay to lie to someone, to say it's not okay to drive too fast, we're actually strengthening the bonds of our society. By defining what we can't do, we're actually all gathering together in a stronger way. As far as deviance in this particular lecture, I'm actually not going to go into a ton of different theories, just a couple. And one I think is one of the most important things you learn in this class. It's called Sookies Control theory. I know that the name isn't exactly spelled like Sookie, but I've looked it up and I think I'm pronouncing it kind of close to correct. Sookies control theory is when deviant acts result when one's bonds to society is weak or broken. And so the idea here is that when somebody is not attached to society, that's when they're going to act out and possibly in significantly negative ways. That's when they're maybe going to break rules, break laws, things of that sort. And so the social bonding in Sookies control theory has four dimensions. Attachment. Attachment often happens in families, that your family is the first socialization that you have that attaches you to others, that you feel love, that you feel security. And not everybody always gets that with family. Oftentimes in my sociology of family class, I do the reminder that family isn't all puppies and rainbows for everyone. It's not necessarily just this whole huge puddle of love at all times. And sometimes family experiences can be excruciatingly painful. And so attachment, when that's not in place as an element of social bonding, that can have real repercussions. Commitment, that you're committed to the norms and you're committed to the rules and the laws. Involvement. I think involvement is one of the really, really big ones. That you are involved in conventional activities in society, that you have a place of belonging because of that involvement. So you think about school. Not everybody necessarily always belongs in school, but maybe you have an after school soccer team that you played on in fourth grade and you had your two friends from that soccer team. Or maybe when you got into high school, many people, but not everybody by all means, because it's a matter of resources sometimes, participates in extracurricular activities. And so that kind of involvement in conventional activities can be a huge part of connecting yourself to society. My husband, who teaches junior high, one of his favorite things on earth is that he gets to be a coach after school. And so at this point, many years into this, I think 10 years actually, he coaches flag football, boys basketball, girls basketball, and track. So one sport a semester. And so it's an after school program that anybody can join, any of the students at the school. And then towards the end of their little season, they pull together what they call an all-stars team. And that all-stars team goes and competes against like three other junior highs. But the idea with having that program from 2:30 to 4:30 every day after school year round, and it's not just that there's four sports, there's all kinds of sports. Those just happen to be the ones he coaches, gives students an opportunity to be involved in a conventional activity. Whereas otherwise, if they were on their own, because so many of their parents are still working until later in the evening, that's when possibly not the greatest choices could be made out of boredom or otherwise. And so that's kind of how involvement can work in relation to deviance. And then finally, beliefs. Beliefs and commitment are kind of the same, that you're committed to following along with society, and you need to believe in society in order to follow along with society. We're in a time, no matter when I'm recording this, quite honestly, it seems, unfortunately, that when you turn on the news, and many of us don't even turn on the news anymore, you see more and more deviant acts. You see acts of violence happening almost in a sense routinely, which is just hard to say without kind of choking back tears, to be honest with you. So often when you hear about acts of violence occurring in our society, you hear about that individual that committed them as being, they oftentimes will sometimes use the word loner, or nobody really knew them. They kept to themselves. Possibly they felt persecuted, or that they, felt like people were against them. We don't talk about Sookies control theory and say that this happens because someone's bonds to society were weak or broken. We talk about that person like they're evil. We usually use the word evil and say that this is them and their, terrible decisions and they're a terrible person. And not to say that they haven't done something absolutely terrible and made a horrifying decision. But we're not looking at the responsibilities that we have together as a society. When you see individuals that are struggling, when you can be a person that bridges the gap between somebody struggling with social norms and you can, that might be the difference. That connection might be the difference. You don't know that necessarily. And no matter what, as long as we approach all of these acts of deviance and not look at this one aspect, how is that person involved in society? Do they believe in society? I don't know exactly where we're going to go as a society. And so I would really challenge you going forward. And it's not to say that you all of a sudden start to look at these incidents and go, oh, well, it's completely understandable. But I think so much of sociology is finding a level of empathy within ourselves because we stop ourselves and say, wait, what is going on in this person's life? How is society impacting them? We're not necessarily all individuals making decisions for ourselves all the time. We're being impacted by the messages we're receiving. We're being impacted by the connections we have, and so on and so forth. The other theory that I want to introduce you to is labeling theory. And so that kind of goes along again with why deviant acts occur. And some of you might have heard, definitely, I would say, of kind of the ideas surrounding labeling theory. And so it's a process just as it says in the title, label someone. And it could happen when you think about it, negative labels and positive labels. And so let's say you were labeled as a problem child, right? Maybe it could even happen in your family. Like, oh, well, you know how Rory is. The reason I picked the name Rory is maybe because that's my brother's name. And maybe we probably socialized him and or labeled him as kind of he misbehaves. And so he's rambunctious, something like that. That can be problematic in schools when those kinds of labels happen. There's also formal labels in our world, especially in the school system. Things like being a student receiving special education services, right? So there can be a lot of stigma that surrounds that. And in that particular instance, it's not stereotyping because a student has been diagnosed, there's been testing and things of that sort. But there's stereotypes associated with the label. And so this is not necessarily about the way that a person acts and things that people do. But when we start to label people as deviant, that's problematic. That's incredibly problematic. And especially because when you hear, oh, you misbehave all the time, you're so rambunctious, you need more help in school. Those kind of stigmas that we create are internalized and you start to believe them about yourself. With the example of students receiving special education services, if you worked with schools, if you worked with students themselves to talk about the fact that this is a resource, that you are a capable, smart person, and we all need help in all different ways. And this is the help that the school system is offering you, as opposed to the narrative that we kind of still keep tucked away that, oh, it's because you're not good enough as a student or you're not smart enough. That's where the stigma and the stereotyping comes in, and that's exceptionally problematic. On the flip side, especially utilizing the school system as an example, students who earn and are capable of doing honors level work, right? So I believe their programs are still called GATE programs. I might have that wrong because I haven't had a student in that school system. And quite honestly, my son received special education services. He was not a student enrolled in honors programs. And so that perception of yourself being in an honors program is also a label. It's a positive label. And so we can take the idea of labeling when we label people as deviant, as we label people as doing things wrong, as we label people as lacking in some way, and we can change that to labeling them as capable, as good, as hardworking, and all things like that. This is, like I said, just a short look at deviance. Deviance and criminal justice and everything is a huge part of sociology. It's oftentimes a whole focus that you can have as a sociology major, but so many times in Introduction to Sociology, I refer to it, I might have already before in this class, at least I am now, that it's kind of a buffet. We pick and choose a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so I really wanted to focus in on these couple of things so that you could tuck them away and utilize them. You can utilize Sookies Control theory to think about broad situations impacting an individual making deviant decisions. And you can be on the lookout for labels and see how they impact people in both negative and positive ways.